stuff, and then we'll have like the erotic and communication stuff. Okay. And so we like intentionally make that break. So it's not just like you're going to keep trying to do painful.
You're listening to In Your Pants with Dr. Susie G, the physiotherapist for your private, helping you get in the know, down the low.
Hey guys, it's Dr. Susie G here, and welcome to another In Your Pants podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. Today's episode is definitely for the crotch enthusiast. We talk about how genitals are not indicative of gender, orientation, or what people enjoy doing sexually. We unpack terms like sex and pleasure and detangle mainstream cultural views about sexuality. You'll learn great conversation starter exercises to break the ice with your partner so that you can dive deeper into your likes and dislikes as well as your partner's. Healthy boundaries to deepen your pleasure experience. And speaking of pleasure, coloring your favorite crotch pictures is on the top of my list. Oh yes, my guest today is also a color creative crotch enthusiast, and I'd love to formally introduce her to you. Heather Edwards has been a pelvic physical therapist since 2003 and is one of the only few ASEC certified sexuality counselors in the world. As an artist, she has a line of coloring books, the Crotch Enthusiast series, that blend playfulness with genital anatomy to creation, non-binary, whimsical works that are inviting and educational. As an event producer, she creates and hosts an adult sex ed event series in Asheville, North Carolina called Vino and Vulvas. You can check out the 2019 season online through vinoandvulvas.com. She also teaches professionally for Pelvic Guru on topics of transgender pelvic health and sexuality counseling. You can find her courses at pelvicguru.com. So are you ready, my crotch crusaders? Because it's time to get this show started. Enjoy. Heather, thank you so much for being on the show today.
You are welcome. I'm very excited to be here.
Likewise, because we're going to be talking about crotches, genitals, right?
My favorite topics.
Yay. So let's start it off by talking about how genitals on their own are not really indicative of gender, orientation, or what people actually enjoy doing sexually.
Yeah. So like this is something that comes up over and over that I feel like I'm always having to explain this sort of thing, because often when we think of everything being so binary, it's all men's health and women's health and penises and vulvas and boys have penises and girls have vaginas, all of that. Like it's so ingrained in the way that we think and the way that we name things that we forget that they're actually separate. And so that's why I'm always like with a vulva, for example, right? Like just seeing a picture of a vulva, like doesn't necessarily mean that the person who has that vulva identifies as a woman. That person could be a transgender man. That person could identify as non-binary. It doesn't really say anything about their innate sense of who they are, right? And so that's why, I don't know any way that we would possibly avoid the topic of like women's health, but that's why that's always such a like a cluster for me, but there are transgender women have penises. And so if we're talking about like women's health, are we talking about people who identify as women, in which case we're talking about vulvas and penises, right? And then any sort of intersex variations in between. Or are we talking about like, oh no, I am a vagina specialist, vulvas and vaginas, in which case we should also be working with transgender men and non-binary people.
All inclusive,
right?
All loving of all people and how they identify with themselves, right?
Yes. Yeah, so that's a question I get a lot because I do a lot of transgender health and things like that. And people ask me, how can I make my women's health practice more inclusive? And it's like, well, and so it's that uncoupling of like, well, what is it? Like, who is it that you want to treat? Like, who is your audience? And I think often it just comes down to like being specific about, is it genitals that you're really talking about? Or is it, gender that you're really talking about, because those aren't the same, right?
I love that. So gender
Yeah.
and genitals, they're not
Gender
the
and
same, and
genitals.
we need to clarify our terms.
Yes, as far as like which one we're really talking about. Yeah. And then like just even kind of considering like, because a lot of times we have different things where it's like, well, men tend to do this and women tend to do this, right? Like men are from Mars and women are from all of that stuff, right? Which are all the gender roles. And this was actually one of the things that like got me really started on this path, because I remember I was in a marriage to a man, and I remember like everything about our relationship like just didn't fit the standard script, and it was so frustrating, and because it made us both feel really like kind of like broken and weird and like what's going on, like if you go into the doctor and they're like, oh well, men tend to be this way and women tend to, I'm like, well, but wait, like, don't put that script on me, because that's not how it fits. And I don't know, it was just always frustrating. And so that's why I was kind of like, you know what, we can all just be however the heck we want, and that's okay. And we don't have to try to pretend like there's a script that we should fit along with, which kind of takes us into like the sexuality thing, right?
Yes.
Those genitals don't necessarily mean that anyone wants to have sex a certain way. So again, we have our like, what does sex mean, right? And often the answer is penis and vagina.
Penis and vagina. I don't know if you guys can see this for those listening, but it'll be fun to go back to YouTube and watch this.
Penis and vagina.
Circle and peg.
Right. And so that's so often this is standard, as far as what that word means, but it means so much more than that. But then even like it gets to the point to where like if you see a picture of a vulva and you were saying, and you were told that this person has sexual pain, like you would have an assumption of what that means, as opposed to, like having an assumption of like what sort of things that person might enjoy doing with their body. Because that person who has a vulva might like prefer to do anal things, or might not like vaginal penetration at all for any reason, even if they're straight, and so there's all sorts of things, or, it might be that they really like, external stuff, or it might like be that they love clit action, or it might be that they hate clit action and it's way too sensitive. Like there's so many different things. So making any assumptions as far as what people like to do with their genitals or don't want to do with their genitals at all, is I think another one of those pitfalls that we often fall into when we're so genitally focused as medical providers.
Right. Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack there. Okay, let me wrap my head around this. I have 3 topics that I wanted to unpack. One being the topic of sex and the definition of sex. Like, I think we need to unpack that a little bit, and I think broaden people's perspectives of challenging some of the mainstream social cultural, like we talked a little bit about that, but I'd like to kind of dive in deeper about some of the barriers and what social cultural, constructs and concepts are ingrained in our society. One. And then the second thing, going to the preferences of individuals and how they like to be touched and ways they like to communicate and what pleasure means for them, taking it to the clinical perspective of, well, then how does that change our clinical interventions, if it does, to incorporate or be respectful of how people like to be touched, or offering permission for them to communicate, hey, I don't do that, but you're telling me to masturbate. Like this is an example that comes that I get often, is particularly around religious and spiritual views, that if you're in a monastery, you've taken vows and you're not, you don't do that, but people are being told to, well, you need to masturbate to get better.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I kind of want to take it those 2 ways, and I'm going to let you. That was a lot. Yeah. I just needed to kind of like
remind me. What was your first point? The
sex and unpacking the definition and like social cultural barriers and constructs that are formed around that.
Yeah. So the thing that I like to do first is kind of try to redefine sex as like penis and vagina, right? Or any sort of penetrative, but most often it's taking the penis and vagina thing away from it, and instead focusing it on like a mutual pleasure, right? So I really, really like to just go there first, because it seems like often when people come in, like if someone comes in with say they're sent in for sexual pain, regardless of what their genitals are, right? Usually the sexual pain they're referring to is for whatever reason, there's some sort of penetrative, whether they're the one penetrating or they're the one being penetrated, thing that they are unable to do. And that's problematic for them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes like that whole act of what they are considering sex is like this thing that is distressful, right? And it's like a thing that usually there's difficulty with conversation around it. The communication breaks down. They're feeling distance between them, like a sense of closeness. Like there's all sorts of things that are breaking down on there. So, and then it's like the thought that just being able to, penetrate without pain or be penetrated without pain is the thing that is going to then fix all of that is like not really there, right? So as far as, if we kind of talk about it clinically a little bit, like if I have like that sort of person come in to see me, what I like to do is really separate out and this is the kind of how we break sex apart, right? So we'll break apart like the genital physical stuff, and then we'll have like the erotic and communication stuff. Okay. And so we like intentionally make that break. So it's not just like you're going to keep trying to do painful things with your partner and hoping that it's less painful or, something like that.
Yeah.
So instead, like we're going to work on getting your physical body feeling better so that how to, relax when you need to and how to manage it and how to, if you're starting to get triggered, how to bring it back down and like all of those things that are really important to be able to learn how to do with your body, right? But then what we're going to do on the other side that is completely separate from your genitals is we're going to talk about pleasure, and we're going to start like actually understanding like, for you individually, what do you like? And, and we're going to start with smells and like, what do you like to look at? Like what sort of like, if you think about like your happiest, most relaxing place, like what's that feel like? What's it smell like? What's it sound like? And just kind of start figuring those things out. Like what is it that brings that sense of pleasure and joy to your body? And then, just kind of stepping up and starting like, okay, well, what sort of touches and sensory things and, and then working on being able to communicate those things with your partner. And, and most likely your partner needs to figure out those things as well. Right. Because usually, people just get so stuck in that, like, well, I think this person likes to do that. And I think this person likes to do that. And like, no one's paying attention to themselves. They're only focusing on the other person. Right. So it's like, we go back to Dirty Dancing, right? Like I will hold my dance space, you hold your dance space, and then we can actually make this dance happen. Because if I'm trying to move you around and you're trying to move me around, we're just going to fall.
Right. That's a great analogy.
Right. That was, sorry. Yeah. I feel like we didn't put the disclaimer on this that, just to mark the time that we're all in like house arrest right now and a little crazy from all the world, but yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of, working on that, like just figuring out what is it that you like and what is it that your body likes. And then from there, I move it in ways of like, you can move it to genitals, right? Like what sort of things do feel good? So we're dealing with the stuff that doesn't feel good over here and working on bringing it to where it feels better. But then on the other side, we're working on all the stuff that does feel good and the things we do like to share and the things where we can provide mutual pleasure to one another. And then maybe we start adding in genitals there. So maybe if my penis feels really good, but my anus doesn't, like we'll start with like penis head stuff, but maybe not scrotum, or we'll start with clitoris, but not vagina. We'll start, whatever it is, so that you can start breaking it apart into where it's not just like everything hurts and is horrible all the time. And oh my gosh, if we get anything started, then I don't know how to stop because I don't want to start this thing that I can't finish, but instead have those boundaries and just only move in places where it feels good, and then past that, and you wait. And then, and then hopefully those little two worlds meet and then everything works.
Magic. I love it. Well, it's like reconnecting with your sexual identity. Like, or, you're just, it's not like it's never been there. It's there, but it's reconnecting in a way that's just more than your parts.
Right. Yeah. And I would suggest that for some people, maybe it's never been there.
Yeah.
Like, like sometimes it is a reconnection, but sometimes I have not ever had the opportunity to ask myself what I actually like, because I've always learned that sex was not about me and was actually something that I'm supposed to give someone. It's something that I'm supposed to be in service for. Right. So, so there's a lot of that too, just as far as like, just paying attention to like, well, no one's ever asked me what I wanted before, I've never actually paid attention to what I like or what I don't like. And I find that sometimes with people who it's like everything just feels too performative.
Right.
And it's like, it's only because you're performing and creating a service. It's not like
there's a goal.
There's got to be
there's an end goal. Yeah.
Right.
Right. It's the fireworks. We got to wait we got to have the fireworks show. Like it's got to happen. Well, speaking of communication, because it's what I'm hearing a lot about, having a conversation about these very important topics so that we don't feel isolated or alone, or like we're the only ones, or shame or guilt or blame, or, all those other, minds that arise. But how would you guide a couple or couples into having these conversations, particularly if they've never had these conversations before, but would like to start to open up the conversation? Like, what advice could you give people
So the easiest one is to read Come As You Are, right? Like that book is absolutely amazing, by Emily Nagoski. And in it, she's a brilliant sex educator. It's super like science-based. It is definitely, and she admits to it because it's based on like research about cisgender women. However, from that standpoint, it is so super inclusive in the way she writes it. And so I think that book is wonderful. And she has all sorts of like, of these workshops or these little like worksheets and exercises that you can do with partners for communication. One of them that I really like that I assign for homework really often for people, like this is like, when we're talking about breaking those two things apart, this is often the first little bit of like erotic date night homework. And this is if I have someone who they've already expressed to me that their partner is receptive to being able to talk about this. They don't feel pressure. They don't feel like, if it's something to where they have a supportive partner, this is the exercises that I would give them. I like to make that disclaimer before I just go there with it, because that's not always the case,
Right.
But it's a yes or a stop or go exercise, right? So it's super basic. You can take a piece of paper and just fold it into quarters. Okay. So you've got a piece of paper with 4 quarters. And then on the top left, you write my go buttons. And then on the top left, my stop buttons. And then on the bottom left, my partner's go buttons. And the bottom right, my partner's stop buttons. And both partners then, and this is something, if you have multiple partners, all of you can do this, right? You can do one for, you can fold that paper however many ways you need,
Origami.
Right. Yeah. It can be 6, it can be 8, whatever you need. But so you just kind of then fill it out from there. So I would be filling it out like what I think my go buttons are, and sometimes that's the really hard one for people is to like I can name everything that like it's a stop button for me, but like what is actually a go button? Like sometimes that can be challenging. But then you're also writing it for your partner. Okay. So I'm like, okay, what are my partner's go buttons and what are their stop buttons? And again, there might be one column that's super easy and one that's not. But then your partner's doing the same thing for you. So this might be the first time that both partners have actually considered, like, what are the things that their partner might be responding to positively or not responding to, And then, the fun is, of course, when you then, that both people show them to each other and then you're comparing them because, some things can be like fixed really quickly there. It's like, oh yeah, she definitely likes it whenever I blow in her ear. And she's like, I hate it every time he blows in my ear. Right. So some things like that where it's like, oh, okay, we really were missing that one. Like,
right.
It's your go, but it's your stop. Or there might be things that are go buttons for both partners that like they didn't realize, pina colada thing, right? But yeah, so it's just like kind of interesting to be able to see that and to get it and to be like, if there's a partner that has like a higher libido and, so one person is always like having to like, no, and, like feels like they're always rejecting or turning away, but then they can write down the things that are not so great and the things that are pretty good. Well, then the partner with higher libido can be like, all right. So if I can eliminate those no's as much as possible and step up the yeses a little bit more, then that can, maybe get us a little bit more on that same playing page. And, and it can be anything from like the way you're touched to like, oh my God, if I have to do the dishes after I made dinner already, just that shit that like makes you a little resentful.
Yes. The things that were like, oh my gosh, you're eating again. Like, didn't you just have a snack? At least that's for me. That's what goes on for me. I'm like, but I'm glad you brought that up because that's a huge, like, it's not just what happens in the bedroom, but it's also what's happening outside of the bedroom is that's what I'm hearing, right? Like it's the entire dynamic of the relationship, which is intimacy, right? Like it's
totally.
It's relationships and how we interact in them, right?
Yeah. And then with each new partner, so like if you're dating, you might have a different list with each person you're with, right? Like I know I had a funny one that I realized when I got together with my partner, who we've been together for quite a while now. But when we started dating, she would do this thing to where she was like, no big deal, but she would like hang her like a jacket or something on the top of a door, and I realized that like, I can have laundry baskets all over the floor, but if I am on my bed and I can see things hung up on the tops of the door, like it was just like, I just can't, like it was this really kind of hilarious thing. Like I need to be able to pretend like my house is a little bit more in order, even if I know that below my visual point, it's not.
Out of sight.
Exactly. Yeah. So just like, just funny things like that. But once you realize them, then you can be like, or like, look, if we're getting ready for bed and then like that to me means I want to go to sleep. That to me does not mean like, okay, let's go have sex now. So, how can we figure it out to where it's not always like bedtime sleepy stuff, know? So yeah. So there's, lots of different factors. There's some, and also the communication thing. Yeah. Like, so there's being able to like, so something I coach my patients on, this is kind of further as we're going along. This is like when we start to like actually kind of bring the genitals and the erotic stuff together. We start talking about the communication before, during, and after sex. Right. So before, and I don't mean like leading up to it. Right. But I mean like a day before or hours before, over coffee, as you're discussing how you carved out time that, evening or afternoon or something, right? So that it's not like part of any sort of like sexy buildup, right? It's a separate conversation. So talking about kind of the things you want to do, like what your boundaries are. And I think about this in particular with people who have pain, right? Because the thing that sucks so much, if anything is going to be painful, or if you're kind of coming out of it being painful, but you're really like, you're feeling pretty confident, but not super confident anymore, is like, you really need to have good boundaries on it. Right. And so if we use that context of if there's potentially something that's going to hurt, okay, then we need to be able to discuss like, all right, so I think my body's feeling up for like this and this and this tonight. Like these things could feel really great. How does that sound to you? Like, does that sound all right? And then kind of like, and I feel like I would like to be the one in charge of what we do, kind of like calling the shots a little bit, or I want you to call the shots, but I want you to stay within these boundaries, kind of figuring those out. Like, what is your energy? Because sometimes, like, if you don't want to call the shots and then you have to call the shots, like, that's a buzzkill. Like, I just wanted you to, like, feed me grapes and do the things that feel nice to me, I wasn't planning on this. So, kind of having those expectations ready. And then also talking about, like, okay, so, and if something does start to feel not great, how are we going to handle that? Right. So, one thing is, like, making sure that each other knows, like, what's it look like when things are going well? So like, okay, if I am enjoying myself, I'm probably going to be like closing my eyes or, breathing this way, making these sounds. Like these are all very good things. Right. And then if I know that I've already told my partner that I'm really going to make sure that I'm giving those positive affirmation things to them so that they can just kind of get that as a constant. They don't have to say, are you okay? How about this? How about this? How about this? Because not fun either. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and then like if something doesn't feel good, like how are we going to do like a quick pause or like, give me just a second, or, hey, can we do something else? Or always kind of having like an easy pivot go-to sort of activity that you can do. So it's not like red flags start going off and then we have to stop
Right.
everything and, end up in tears or something, so it's just kind of like, how can we just shift and move the experience and know that like at some point there's probably going to be something that we need to adjust or move and like, that's okay. And then being able to talk about it afterwards, like, hey, that went really well when we did this and this, but this part maybe was a little frustrating and or, like how maybe we could do it differently next time, and just kind of allowing each other that whole experience. So then you can move into it and do either better the next time, the same. I don't know if better is the right word, but, improve your communication, kind of smooth out the rough spots with it.
That's right. Well, and that's great because I think that's important, like a key point of like just awareness of your own needs, but also considering the needs of your partner and like you said earlier in the conversation of finding that interpersonal space where that safe dialogue can happen, where you're both trusting and respecting of one another as individuals, but then coming together, no pun intended, to right. I know the puns, it's like endless here. But you know what I mean? Like you're kind of, you're dancing together in this interpersonal space of two worlds uniting not into one, but sharing a space that is a vulnerable space for a lot of us. And if you don't have that trust component, or you don't feel like you can be yourself, to open up that way or to receive or give, then that might be a barrier or a roadblock. Yeah,
for sure. There's so like I think we could talk for 4 hours about that statement you just made right there, because like it is like that, the thing of, and that's something that I feel like I often have to like teach people or give little like step-by-step lessons is how to receive, right? Like the ability to receive pleasure from another person without feeling like you need to be doing something in return. It can be really, really hard for people, but then on the flip side of that, of course, is like, if we use the example of oral sex, which is, a very giver receiver sort of thing.
Right.
And so, if someone is receiving oral sex, but they are concerned that maybe it seems like they're being lazy or just laying there or not like responding enough or not being enthusiastic enough or not making their body do the same thing, or maybe, oh my gosh, did I take a shower recently, or whatever the heck it is, like all of those things block you from actually being able to enjoy the experience, right? But on the flip side, if you are the one that is performing oral sex, like all you want to do is see your partner that you're performing oral sex on, like just be enjoying the heck out of themselves and receiving that and feeling all the good energy and skills and crazy mad techniques that you're doing, right? Like that's what you're hoping as the one who's performing that. So if you can like kind of feel that as a receiver and be like, all right, I'm just going to like be in my body and experience all this good stuff and block the rest of that crap out, and not feel like I have to like be petting someone's head or rubbing their shoulder or doing something to feel connected. My connection is my connection to my body. It's not my physical connection to that person. So,
oh my gosh, that was awesome. That was beautifully said. I mean, right up there. I mean, exactly. You hit the nail on the head there. It's the stories that our mind tells us, the narrative we get wrapped up in robs us from the sensory experience. That we're having. It like literally it adds a burden onto that experience when it's really not necessary, although I'm sure very normal. So I'm not here to say like, oh, just because we're thinking that way, there's something wrong with us or something like that. No, not at all, because it happens to all of us in not just in the bedroom, but outside of the bedroom. There's so much story that goes on behind this, that, or another, right?
And it's like all those layers of complication. But if instead, and that's why I like the definition of sex as, mutual pleasure, like that's it. So if we can always back it down to like, are we creating a pleasurable, joyful experience together, like, like that's always the underlying question. So if like you're sitting there thinking like, this whole time, well, they seem like they're really enjoying themselves, so I need to act like I'm enjoying this too. Like that's no fun. And then if you're a really good actor with it and you really make them think, then you've just taught them that you like that. And then it's, and then you have to get out of that. And then it feels like a lie by saying, oh, actually, that's not this thing that I like. I know it seems like that, but like that.
Right.
Like never fake, right? I shouldn't say never fake. Sometimes you can like stretch the truth a little bit for dramatic effect if you want to, but but not as a general rule. You don't want to get in the habit of faking.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Good point.
Right.
Shift, right.
Shift to something else that is more authentically enjoyable.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, okay. So not to switch gears here abruptly, but it's all in the same, I think, topic that we're talking about is how do we as clinicians, so for all the clinicians that are listening who are helping people with sexual issues and their health and educating and pain and et cetera, how can we take what we just talked about? Because those are important conversations to have for clinicians, because as a pelvic therapist, when I was learning pelvic therapy, as you said earlier, it's women's health. Mm-hmm. And then I started to shift towards working with male bodies, and then realizing already the stigma around, or the labels that we have around certain things. But as far as like what I was taught, it was like, we do things this way. This is how you do the exam. This is the treatment, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And as I progressed through my learning and education, working with people over several years, I realized, like, first of all, there's no one size fits all. But secondly, like, we as clinicians are so used to doing stuff to people. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid we've missed a boat of, let's ask these questions of how people want, like the recommendations we're making and the treatment techniques that we're using, are they really in alignment with what that individual wants? Yeah. And needs and expects, like, because they come in with expectations of, please help me. And they're, whatever you suggest, I'm going to do.
You're the doctor, right? That sort of thing.
So can we maybe unpack that a little bit?
And we can totally loop in the masturbation thing there too, of that like suggestion of, oh, well, you should be masturbating and things like that. Okay. So yeah. So I feel like it's important for us as clinicians to take away our agenda, right? Which is sometimes hard, because especially there's so many different examples of this, but one I think that we don't think of as often is like when we're super like, girl power and we're like, sex positive and all this stuff, like that might not be in any sort of alignment with that person who's sitting there in front of us, right. And that's just fine, so like our therapeutic goals don't need to go beyond necessarily what theirs are. No, I'm not saying we can't educate them to help them see a little bit more of what maybe fits with them. But like, as an example, like if you have someone who is a very feminine presenting person, but has told you that they identify as non-binary, and you're doing all this big girl power about the vagina and the clitoris and all of that stuff, that's going to feel super like gender dysphoric and funky and weird to someone, right? Even though like it's really cool to learn about the whole structure of the clitoris and yay, and all of that. But if we're doing that in a way that is, it's like, yeah, sister, we're on the same team sort of stuff, with some people that's great. With some people that's like, oh, I am never going back to that person again, because that was so uncomfortable. I felt completely unseen, like they didn't get me at all, so, kind of examples like that. But then like, if someone had, because I'll ask about like self-pleasuring. I usually don't use the masturbation word until, a little further. We should probably throw in here too, that we're both in North Carolina right now, in Asheville, right? So we definitely have some maybe contextual things that are maybe a little bit different than if we were practicing in California or something.
Right.
But definitely with like masturbation, like as I talk to someone about what their goals for sexuality are, or sometimes I'll just throw out like, as far as, with sexuality, and I'll usually say, when I ask you about sexuality, I'm not actually asking about like your relationship status, because a lot of times that's how people hear that question, oh no, my husband died, right? Is the question too. How is your sexual function happening?
Mm-hmm.
And so like trying to kind of get away from that and being like, do you have any concerns about your, or about any sexual changes you've had either with sensation or your ability to feel aroused or your ability to feel lubricated or any of those things, and then like as they're going on with it, it might be that they identify all sorts of things that you would consider issues, right? But then I'll say like, do these things, are they problematic for you? Like, is this distressful for you at all? And oh no, it's fine. It's not a problem. Okay. And then maybe I would educate them to be like, okay, so, some of those things are things that physical therapy can help with. So if at any point that is on your goal or something that you would like to talk about, we absolutely can talk about it. But, that's only up to you. I just want to make sure that you understand, what sort of things are available, because you don't want them just to think that, oh, well, no one can help me with this,
Right.
So, but you also don't want to push them into trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out something that they're not in the space to go there with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and with masturbation, like I like often with masturbation, if someone says that they don't masturbate, right, and I'm looking for their facials on it, if it's like a, or if it's just like, no, not really, then sometimes I'll, go there like a little gently as we're like talking about things. It's like, and just so like, things like self-stimulation it's kind of like taking your vulva, if we're or penis, right, is taking your genitals for a jog, it's getting that blood flow going. It's, it's kind of seeing how everything works. It's, and all of the thing, you can get your pelvic floor muscles working during it. There's all sorts of good physiological stuff that can happen with it.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would only recommend that if you're comfortable and if that is something that you want more of in your life, right? So it's kind of, and sometimes they'll be like, oh, well, yeah, I would actually love an excuse to go to Baba Boom and get a new vibrator or something, right? So like for those patients, then what I'm doing is like, I'm giving them the permission and then also just kind of like a little shove, like, yeah, that would be a good idea. Like that, that's certainly a way that we can practice, that you can start learning more about your body so that we can kind of get there faster. Because if you can give me more feedback on what's going on for you,
Right.
then great. But if that's something that they're not interested in, then I'm not ever going to even start to suggest that they should, because then it just becomes a place of like,
Right.
shame and disgust and like, and you don't want them attaching anything you're trying to tell them with things that they feel are like morally wrong or anything like that. So,
Right. Oh, those are all really awesome and very important key points that you just brought up as far as their interaction again of a relationship between a practitioner and another person, and just really being mindful of, are you really serving that person in the way that they want to be helped? And I think that's really important. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And I was going to say Vava Voom was a shameless plug for the best. I kid you not. I mean, I come from Chicago and I've been to many sex shops and stuff out there, but it does not compare to what Asheville, this little town of Asheville, has. Vava Voom. Excellent.
Amazing shop. Yeah.
Amazing
and you can
shop.
get stuff from them online.
Oh,
and everyone that works there is so amazing. That's like, I love sending my patients there because I'm always like, make sure you talk to someone. Don't just like intentionally talk to someone, like, and tell them. And so I've even like written down scripts for people, like walk into Baba Boom, find someone who works there and say, Heather sent me and I need this. And they will take it from there.
Love it. I love it.
It always works.
Use your resources. Yes. That's great. That's awesome. That's so awesome. Speaking of resources, you have a couple of resources yourself. Well, actually a lot of things that you are creating. Do you have your crotch coloring books?
I do have my crotch coloring books, and there's something extra exciting I'll show you. So
Ooh.
you already have one of them, right? Do you have the first one?
I do.
This
I
is
have
the one you have.
Yep.
This is important parts, the coloring book for the crotch enthusiast. In it, you get to learn how to draw all your own custom crotch. And then there's all sorts of external genitals and all sorts of non-binary, all sorts of crazy stuff in there. So for fun.
Hey, Heather, real quick, can you define non-binary for those that don't know necessarily what that means?
Yes.
Sorry.
So non-binary. So when we talk about gender, like a crazy little table here. So we've got like male and female. Then cisgender on top of that would mean like if you were born and the doctor said this is a girl, and then you grew up feeling like, yes, I am a girl, I am a woman, then you would be cisgender, right? If you were born and the doctor said this is a boy, and you grew up saying, I'm a girl, then you would be transgender, right? But both of those are kind of either like, male or female, cisgender or transgender. And then non-binary is kind of either like you feel like a little bit of both, or you feel like neither. So it's kind of just like male terms aren't really right for me. Female terms aren't really right for me. I'm just somewhere in the middle. Genderqueer is sometimes a term people use for it too. But yeah. So anyway, but when I say non-binary, I mean like everything is not either penis or vagina. There's all sorts of shades of in between when we talk about anatomy. So that's my first one. So it's all the external anatomy. And then my one that just came out last week, which is I don't even have my like official copy. So this is the one that still says like sample, not for resale.
Oh, okay. I totally get it. Oh, we get first dibs here. Woo-hoo.
Right. So this one's called The Inside Story. And so instead of just being the external anatomy, and it's funny. So I've got all sorts of internal stuff too. You see. So this is like a period one. Can you see it?
Oh,
so a lot of them are this
beautiful.
like cross-section view where you can see organs. But then again, it'll show people who've had like, hysterectomies or penile prostheses implanted or diva cups or strap-ons or all sorts of different things. There's also pelvic floor ones. So here's like a pelvic floor one. So
I love it. I love it.
Thanks. Yeah. So, and then I also have a big anatomy educational section at the end and stuff. So you get like all the terms and, all the images and things like that. So
fantastic.
So that's the one that just came out that has a whole lot more educational stuff on it. And then
we'll link that in the show notes for sure.
Cool. And then there's another one that I actually have coming out like maybe in a week or two because, I've been home a lot. And so it will be called Ways to Play. And so it's all sorts of like, it's external genitalia again, but it's all sorts of like fun, imaginative, playful ways that you can reimagine your body. Like here's like a goddess.
I love that. You guys,
like,
whoever's listening, you all have to watch the YouTube show and tell version.
Yeah. So this one is the pussy.
The pussy. I love it. You're speaking my language, Heather.
This one, and this one is like a drag queen penis.
Oh.
Yeah. So they're all sorts of they're ones that are much
all
more
sorts
like
of fun.
Up. Yeah, it's kind of this book. So
that's so great. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, like I said, we'll link all of those to the podcast show notes so people can get them and color away and then share and tag your color your pages with Heather.
Yes, Heather. My Instagram is at Heather Edwards Creations, and you can tag that. And and then I also do an anatomy library. And so if you are like a sex educator or a pelvic health provider and you need pictures, I have 7 different varieties of crotches, and they have different sorts of labels and different, like some of them are in like rainbow palettes and some of them are in flesh tones and some of them are black and white. We've got pubes and no pubes, all sorts of different varieties. But if you need some things like that, you can let me know too. And I've got a library that you can access. So
that's awesome. And then you also do Venos and Vulvas. So can you talk to us about that and what, what's going on since we can't get together in person for them, what you've been doing with that,
I can't talk much about that yet because I'm not really sure right now, honestly. So
Understandable.
yeah, right. So Vino and Vulvas is a live event that I have been doing. Susie has been one of my guests at Vino and
Oh,
Vulvas, which has been fun.
it's an honor.
Um,
Thank you.
but it's a sex ed in a bar event where it's like medical professionals, mental health professionals, and then also we get like burlesque dancers and drag queens and things up on stage with us too. And we talk about a big gamut of like adult sex ed sort of stuff. Yeah, it's in a bar. You can hang out. It's lots of fun, and we've been doing it since 2015, and it's like my favorite thing to do. It's just so much fun, and I love that it's a live event. One of the things that now that we're not able to gather in groups, that when everyone's people are like, oh, are you going to do it online? Are you going to do this? And I'm just like feeling it out, and so much of it, it's the vibe, and it's the being there with all of these other people and seeing this whole community of who's there, of like, all the queer people, all the not queer people, the guys, the girls, all the ages, all the, just this big fun collection of people who have all got together to watch a topic of like beer and buttholes or something, like it's just, I love it. And I haven't not yet figured out like what I'm going to do as far as in this time where we can't do live stuff yet. I'm sure I'm going to come up with something. Right now, I'm just focusing a little bit more on my coloring books because, everyone needs something to color when they're, stuck at home. But yeah, I'm sure it'll morph into something. It'll get there. But if anyone wants to watch, I've got a season 2019 is available. And I have the first episode so far of 2020, but then I'll download the second one, but I'm probably going to switch those around. So they're just individual purposes or, individual events to watch, because I'm not going to have a 2020 season, which sucks. I was all excited for that.
I know.
But yeah, so you can get on if you go to vinoandvulvas.com and you go to online event access, you can binge watch Vino and Vulvas if you want. So
way better than Netflix. Trust me.
Way better than Netflix.
Trust me. Okay, awesome. Well, how else can our listeners and viewers reach out to you if they have questions or want to connect with you? I know you have a couple of Instagram handles. We mentioned some of those, but any other ways that you'd like to shout out now?
Yeah, anyone can email me at info@heatheredwardscreations.com or at vinoandvulvas @gmail.com. vinoandvulvas.com, you can get there. And then on Instagram, you can find me at Vino and Vulvas or at Heather Edwards Creations. Those are probably the easiest.
That's great. Awesome. Well, Heather, thank you so much for a very awesome and fun conversation talking about crotches and genitals and everything in between.
All the good stuff. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me, Susie. It was a great time.
And to all our listeners and viewers out there, thank you so much for being here with us, as always, in loving wellness for your pelvis. This is Dr. Susie G signing off. Until next time, my friends.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to drsuzieg.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles on today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear feedback. Thanks again.